Hi, Joe Cerrone.
And Alan Rosen.
Welcome to CAD-107, Introduction to 3D Printing, in our second Zoom classroom meeting. Alrighty, so we've updated the announcements. Today we'll take a look at our Module 1. We'll review that. We'll look at our Chapter 2, PowerPoint. And then we'll look at some lab activities with our slicer and a calibration cube. Currently, we're working on our Do Not Disturb sign. That's our Lab 1 project. If we take a look at our Lab 1 project, we can go to the content area. And it's a basic sign. And essentially what we want to do is go through some of the things we need to do in order to use the software to run 3D printing. And so it's from our 20 projects textbook. You can use either AutoCAD or SolidWorks. Here's the PDF of the drawing. If you'd like to draw it from scratch, you're welcome to. It's in millimeters, and so the part is 128 millimeters by 55 millimeters by 3 millimeters. And essentially what we do is we just draw up the shape of the object as it's shown here, put the text on, and then we can export that to our slicer. And so last week we talked a little bit about that. And so we have a student file in Lab 1. And what we do is we can download that file and open it. And so here it is on CAD. And then essentially what we're doing is working with some of the CAD commands. And if you haven't used CAD before, as we start to work with AutoCAD, you can turn the wheel on the mouse to increase the magnification, push the wheel on the mouse to pan it. And what we did was we made a copy of this and then we modeled it. And so the completed project would look like this. And so we have the videos there, and we talked about this last week, so I'm not going to go through that component. What I'm going to do today is to review how we take this and bring it into 3D printing. So once we have our part modeled, and as we said, there's videos in Module 1 to show that, what we would do is we go up to the big red A here, and we would select Export. And then we would export this as an STL file. So we say Other File Formats. And so here's the file format that I want to choose. STL stands for Standard Triangle Language. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export that to a directory where I can find it. So I'm just going to put it in my folder for class 2. And I'll save it. And when you save the file, what you need to do is you actually need to select the geometry and hit enter. You can see it's creating the file. And then we bring it into our slicing software, which is our Dremel slicing software. And in the main splash page, we've given you the instructions to download it. But you can Google Dremel slicer. So here we have our slicing software, and it's set up for the Dremel 3D45. And so when we first start working with the software, we set the file type as a Dremel 3D45. And then we open up the STL file that we just created. And so I put that on my USB. And I can open that. And so it's not smart enough to know where to orientate that on the build plate. And so you can click on it. And then we have these navigation tools here on the side. Move, scale, rotate, mirror, and per model setting. And we can talk about that later. Also down here is the view mode, and we'll talk about that once we go through and prepare it for slicing. Now, when we start working with this, rather than go with a custom, we can go to the recommended print settings. And so the recommended print settings are very basic. And infill is the material that is printed inside. I'm going to push the wheel on my mouse and move this onto the build plate by grabbing these axes. And when it's on the build plate and it fits, it will turn blue like that. I can turn the wheel on the mouse. I can push the wheel on the mouse. And so that is now on the build plate, and that looks fine. It's laying flat on the plate. And then I'm not going to need support. Support would be used on some other models, and we'll give an example of that as we go through and we print with it. Build plate adhesion, I'm going to leave on, and we're going to set this for PLA, which is polylactic acid, and that's a material type. If we are ready to slice it, we hit prepare. And then once it's been prepared, what it will do is it will tell you how long it's going to take to make that part. So it's going to take 1 hour and 7 minutes. And then we can look at the layers by selecting layers. And as you can see, now it's showing how the part is going to be built. And so the first layer is going to lay down the build plate adhesion. And then the second layer will continue to build the infill. And this is our infill pattern at 20%. And so the more infill, the stronger the part. But the more infill that we have, the longer it takes to build. And so if we increase the infill percentage, we have to re-prepare it. And then we have now a higher infill amount. And then the cycle time will typically increase. And so as you can see, every time I increase the build infill, we go up about 10 to 15 minutes to build the part. I'm going to leave it at 20% and hit prepare. And then essentially we go through and we just check our layers, make sure that it's a buildable part. We can actually see where the letters come in. And it's going to print this in one color. And so what we would do is we would save it to a removable drive, and then we would place that USB drive into one of the printers. And we'll show that next week when we start doing some hands-on demonstrations of the printer. If we take a look at the actual part itself, you actually see that it has the number of layers that are built off. Here's the material. And as it prints, you can actually see a little bit of the filament in between the letters and things like that. There's not a lot of rework that needs to be done on this part. Very oftentimes we'll take some tools to remove what's called our support material. Now this one doesn't really have anything, maybe just a little bit of material between the letters. You know, we can kind of clean that up. It's a very good idea to have some files for post-processing of the parts. and you can get yourself a fine set of filing tools. But for the most part, this one prints without a lot of rework for it. You can paint the models. So we have had other models and things like that where we've gone through and painted them. And so you can go through and paint them. And then as far as build material and support material goes, what we would do is we would take the parts out of the machine. And I think I'll just see if I can switch over to my other cam. And so here we have one of our 3D 45s, and they would come out on the build plate like this. And then the parts have what's called support material on them. And so as we're working with the part, we can take that to a station to remove it. And what we would do is we bring it over to an area here. And then this is what's called our support material. And you can take a cutter and you can remove that. Because what happens is it cannot print this area here because it's printing layer by layer and it can't print in the air. And so it will build the support material. And it just removes like that. And then we can have our parts. But there is a certain process that we have to actually go through to build these. And so here's another part. Where we have a considerable amount of build material on it that would also need to be removed. All right. So this will be our first part, and we'll go through and we'll create that part and print that. You'll go through and create the model, add your information. You can customize it as you like. And we'll slice that in the slicer. And what you'll do is you'll turn in the STL file and the CAD file. And so we go to CAD here. Here's my part. I'm going to say File, Save As, and I'm going to save this.
Joe, you gotta switch over.
Sorry, I have to switch over to the camera.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Can you see my screen now?
No, take a look. Go.
I am. Just tell me if you can see it.
No. I see what's on the drum roll.
All right.
Yeah, share it with us.
But my screen should be sharing. Right? Do you see my screen?
I can see the screen from Dremel.
Okay, got it. Can you see my CAD screen now?
Yes, it is.
Got it. All right, resuming. So we're going to turn in our CAD file. And so here's the CAD file. We showed how to export that as an STL. And what I would do is I would just save it. And I'll save it as my initials as lab 1. And I'll save it in a location where I can locate that. And so I've got my USB with my courses. And I'm going to put it in a folder for the second class assignment. And then you're also going to turn in the STL file. And that's what we'll use for printing. And so we would go export, other file formats, dial in an STL file format, save, and select that information. Hit enter. And then when we go to turn these in, we'll use D2L. So here we are in D2L. We'll go to our assignments folder. We'll go to module 1. We'll go to add a file, locate the file. And so here's my CAD file, and then here's my STL file. I'll say open. I'll add those. And we'll submit it. Now, for some reason, my screen sharing is paused. Is that correct, Al?
Yes, sir.
All right. So doing that again.
You gotta switch over.
You can see my screen now, right?
No, you haven't shown this. I see AutoCAD. I don't see the other one. Not sharing.
How about now?
All I see is AutoCAD, sir.
Right. And it's moving, right?
Yes, sir.
That's what we want. And so we would save this file and we would save the STL file, and then we would turn those in. And it seems that I have to do a new share every time. They must have updated the software. And so I would go here, let's share it. Go into my D2L, go to my assignments, and I'll have to submit this again. So we go to module 1, add a file, locate your file. And so here's my CAD file and here's my STL file. Add those.
Down below too.
And then submit it.
Well, they also can put a comment if they want to talk to us and ask us a question about it.
That's correct. And so if you do have questions, you can add a comment. All righty. So that's how to submit module 1 lab assignment for printing. And we have bins located at the Skokie campus for you to come in and pick up your projects. And we'll continue to put those projects there. All righty, I'm going to stop this recording and we're going to make a second one. And so that's how to turn in the first assignment.